My name is Jay Hightman. I've been residing in the area since 1979. At present, I live in the Camelot subdivision. In the many years that I've been here, the area has grown significantly in terms of population and motor vehicle use. However, over this period of time, the pedestrian bicycle infrastructure has not kept pace with this growth. I'm deeply concerned over this for my 20-year-old daughter, Robin. A very experienced cyclist and graduate of Charlottesville High School was killed in New York City on June 24th when a box truck collided with them. 18 days later, my 19-year-old daughter, Rachel, a triathlete and second-year Eccles scholar at the University of Virginia, was struck by a driver of a car while she was riding in a bike lane not far from here on Preston Avenue and 9th Street Northwest. Fortunately, she escaped with no life-threatening injuries, even though her bicycle was destroyed. It was the second time this year she's been hit by a driver in this area. Please think about this for a moment. I nearly lost both of my children to collisions within 2.5 weeks' time. As a result of traffic violence, which has affected my family, my wife and I are founding members of the Richmond chapter of Families for Safe Streets, which is an organization to help those who have lost or had loved ones injured on our roadways, as well as to promote changes to save others from the grief that I'm personally dealing with. Currently, the Board of Supervisors is considering an ordinance on dockless mobility. I consider the use of bicycles, e-scooters, mopeds, and the like a way to reduce congestion, our carbon footprint, while adding to the quality of life for those that call this area our home. Specifically, I would like to address the need for enhanced investment in infrastructure to provide safety to those who ride. This will not take place quickly, so I believe it prudent to allow riders of e-scooters and younger children to ride on the sidewalks or paved bicycle paths where there's not a separate bike lane or protected bike lane available. I support the use of helmets and lights, but in the provision of proposed in the code of section 901B, the e-scooters, the design of them really doesn't permit the use of an active taillight because of the low profile. I'm hesitant to recommend such, but I wanted to show that there are lights available that can be placed on helmets because, as was mentioned earlier in this discussion, the lighting in the county is poor and visibility is critical for us to avoid fatalities.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Jay.
This isn't the daughter that I had that died, Robin.
Good evening. I'm Peter Krebs from the Piedmont Environmental Council. I'd like to just start by thanking all of you for your service, but especially Supervisor Dill and also Supervisor Randolph, who are finishing your terms. You all have been champions of mobility in the community, and I'm really looking forward to working with you in your next phase. I hope you stay with it. I'd also like to commend the county on getting ahead of this dockless scooter and mobility issue. I love the way that you're working hand in hand with the city and the university. And I actually don't have anything really to add. I think Kevin's done a great job. I did want to speak a little bit about Article 9, though. There are a few small adjustments I'd make. That's where the issue with the sidewalks exists. I'll simply point out that the infrastructure simply is not there for people to be riding bikes, especially when you think about places like Hydraulic Road or Fifth Street. A lot of times it makes good sense to ride on the sidewalk. I'm a city resident, but I'll tell you, when my child was riding his bike to Buford, I told him, ride on the sidewalk when you're on Fifth Street. I'll pay the fine, it's worth it. So I would be careful about adding a sidewalk prohibition that is beyond what the state requires. The state is a pretty good policy about giving notice and other things as well. And one other small tweak, Jay already mentioned the issue about the lights. I might not have read it correctly, but it looked like there was actually a little bit of confusion about the tail light, where it calls for, in one line calls for a reflector, which is good sense, and then the next subsection calls for a tail light. That's a bit confusing, and I don't think it's really necessary. I would just follow the Commonwealth's requirements. And in general, when the Commonwealth has good sense requirements, I think it's better to not do it locally, because then there's sort of a he said, she said opportunity for discussion between a rider and law enforcement, which isn't good. But anyway, I commend you all for the work, love the discussion. I'm pretty excited about seeing how this goes forward, and thank you.
Hello, my name is Thomas Dickerson from the Rio district, I believe, the Hollymead neighborhood at least. I agree with the concern about riding on sidewalks. However, I think realistically, given the state of the county's infrastructure, we should continue to allow riding these devices and bicycles on sidewalks, because again, there's simply not adequate bike lanes, bike infrastructure in all parts of the county. I would agree with the logic behind a road-by-road decision on, in the case where there is an existing bike lane, to require the use of that lane, and when there's not an existing bike lane, to allow riding on the sidewalks. However, I feel like that would be complicated, given that some routes would cross between these different types of roads. Again, I think the simplest solution is simply to continue to allow bicycles and other wheeled electric low power devices to ride on the sidewalks. Personally, I've witnessed, well, just earlier this afternoon, an individual, a non-sporting bicyclist, based on his appearance, he was simply someone trying to get from point A to point B for a very practical purpose. And he was traveling at nowhere near the rate of speed of the vehicles on the roadway. And so even though there was a bike lane, he had decided that he felt safer on the sidewalk. And of course, there were 0 pedestrians on the sidewalk, so it seemed to me ridiculous that we would require that he ride his bicycle in the bike lane when a safer alternative existed, given his slow rate of speed. So, again, I would urge the removal from the proposed ordinance of this section 9-903 about riding on sidewalks. I just don't think that regulation needs to exist. Again, as was mentioned previously, the state regulations require the operators of these devices to yield to pedestrians on the sidewalk, to exercise safe passing behaviors, to announce yourself prior to passing a pedestrian. And I think that's adequate. I don't know that the county needs to add new regulations that would have a chilling effect on the use of alternative transportation.